The photograph trembled in Margaret Calloway's hands. It was a small thing, 4 inches by 6, black and white, edges soft with age. A young man she had never seen before, standing beside a version of Robert she barely recognized. 20-something, laughing, alive in a way she had forgotten he could be. But it wasn't the photograph that had stopped her breathing. It was the boy standing across the desk from her, 16 years old, tall and still, the way a person stands when they are trying very hard not to take up too much space. And there, hanging from a thin cord around his neck, catching the pale light that filtered through the study's long-closed curtains, Robert's university ring. The one that had been missing from its velvet box for 3 weeks. The one she had turned the bedroom upside down looking for. The boy didn't know what it meant. She could see that plainly. He wore it the way someone wears a piece of a person they never got to keep. She did know, and the knowing had taken the floor out from under her. Quote, 0. His voice was quiet, careful. Quote 1. She couldn't answer, not yet. Ma'am. He took a small step forward. Should I get my dad? No. The word came out before she could stop it. No. Stay. She set the photograph face down on the desk. Her fingers left a slight smear on the surface. She'd been in the garden before coming inside, hadn't thought to wash her hands. 14 months of leaving this room sealed and dark, and now she was standing in it, with soil still under her fingernails, and a stranger's son who wore her husband's ring like a birthright he didn't know he had. She looked at him. Really looked. The tilt of his head, the line of his jaw, the way his eyes, steady, patient, a little guarded, moved across the bookshelves like they were reading a language he almost recognized. Her chest pulled tight. She had noticed it the very first morning he walked through the back gate. She hadn't let herself understand what she was noticing. That ring, she said finally. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Where did you get it? He reached up and touched it without thinking, a reflex, the way people touch things that matter. It was my mother's. My dad gave it to me after she passed. He said she'd want me to have it. Your mother. Margaret's hand found the edge of the desk. Quote, 10, quote. He met her eyes. Quote, 11, quote. He said, quote, 12, quote. The room went very quiet. Outside, a mockingbird called twice from the oak tree, and then went silent. Somewhere in the house, the old kitchen radio played the tail end of a gospel hymn, thin and sweet through the walls. Margaret looked at the boy, at the ring, at his hands, at the careful way he held himself, and felt 30 years rearrange themselves around a truth she hadn't known she was missing, and what he said next would change everything she thought she knew about the man she had loved for 30 years. But that's not where this story begins. The fun is just beginning. Tell us what city you're from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The tension is rising. Who's watching from where? Like and subscribe to the channel. More to come. Tell us in the comments who's from which country, and give us a like and subscribe. The plot thickens. Let's check our geography. Tell us where you are now. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. We're just warming up. Tell us where you're watching from. Give the video a like and hit the subscribe button. The climax is near. Share where you're from, like, and be sure to subscribe. Events are unfolding rapidly. Write your city in the chat, give it a like, and subscribe so you don't get lost. The juiciest part is yet to come. Let's get started. Get to know each other. Where are you from? Like and subscribe right now. The suspense is building. Tell us where you're watching this episode from and reward us with a like and a subscribe. The excitement is running high. Tell us what city you're from now. Give us a big like and subscribe to the channel. Before we get back to that moment, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, make sure you're subscribed. Now let's go back to the beginning. 14 months earlier, Margaret Calloway had known exactly what each morning would hold. Half a grapefruit, black coffee, one slice of wheat toast, no butter. She had eaten the same breakfast for 20 years, first with Robert across the table, now alone. The kitchen smelled the same as it always had: old cedar from the cabinets, the faint mineral trace of well water, and something that might have been pipe tobacco, or might have been memory. She had stopped trying to tell the difference. She was 58 years old. She had been a school teacher for 19 years before Robert, and she still moved through a room like someone accustomed to being watched, back straight, nothing wasted. Her pale blue linen shirt had a collar frayed at one corner. She'd had it 11 years and saw no reason to replace it. The estate sat on 4 acres at the edge of Charleston, screened from the road by a long row of live oaks draped in Spanish moss. 6 bedrooms. A garden that had been Robert's pride and was now, 14 months on, going quietly wild. The roses had grown leggy and unkempt. The stone path that wound through the back lawn had cracked in 2 places over the winter, and Margaret had written the repair cost in her paper ledger, and then closed the ledger without calling anyone. She stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and looked at the garden and thought about calling someone today. She thought that most mornings. The knock at the back gate came at 7:45. She set down her cup and went to answer it. The man standing on the other side was broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, wearing a faded green work shirt with his name stitched above the pocket. Curtis. He had a firm handshake and steady eyes, and her neighbor Patricia had called him the most reliable person she'd ever hired. Quote, 13. Quote, he nodded once. Quote, 14. Quote, 15. Quote. She glanced past him. A boy stood a few feet back, tall and lean, looking at the overgrown rose beds with the focused expression of someone taking quiet inventory. He wore beat-up work boots and a gray t-shirt washed so many times it had gone the color of fog. Curtis said. Margaret said. She looked at the boy. Quote, 19. He met her eyes. Quote, 20. Quote, 21. Quote, 22. That was all. He picked up a pair of pruning shears from the bag at his father's feet and walked toward the rose beds without being told. Margaret watched him for a moment. The way he moved, deliberate and unhurried, already reading the garden like a problem he intended to solve. She went back inside. She picked up her coffee. She stood at the window above the sink and watched him work. There was something about the way he tilted his head when he stopped to look at something, a slight angle, left and down, like he was listening to a thought. She had seen that gesture before. She couldn't say where. She drank her coffee and told herself it was nothing. By the second week, Margaret had settled into a new rhythm without quite meaning to. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Curtis and Marcus arrived at 7:45, same as the first morning. The garden was already changing. The rose beds were trimmed back to something dignified. The cracked stones on the path had been reset with sand and patience. Margaret had started leaving sandwiches on the back porch. Turkey and Swiss on sourdough, the same kind she used to make for Robert on the weekends he spent in the yard. She told herself it was just practical. Workers needed to eat. On the 9th day, she heard something that made her stop in the hallway. A voice, low and unhurried, coming from under the oak tree at the far end of the lawn. She moved to the window and looked out. Marcus was sitting in the grass during his lunch break, back against the trunk, the sandwich wrapper folded neatly beside him. He had a book open across his knee, small, battered, the spine repaired with electrical tape, and he was reading aloud to himself in a quiet murmur, the words too soft to make out through the glass. She went to the back door and opened it. The words came clearer. He was reading poetry, Something about a road and light, and what a man carries when he walks away from a place he loved. She recognized the poem. She recognized the book. Robert had owned that same collection, dog-eared, annotated in pencil, sitting on the third shelf of his study. She hadn't been in that room in 14 months, but she could see the book's spine in her mind as clearly as if it were in her hand. She went back inside before Marcus could look up. The following Tuesday, she brought the sandwiches out herself instead of leaving them on the porch. __, quote _23. __, she asked. Marcus looked up. He held the cover toward her without speaking. American Poetry. The name on the front was someone she didn't know, but the wear on the book was old and deliberate. Someone had loved it for a long time before him. "Where'd you find it?" "Thrift store," he said. 3 years ago. Cost me $0.25. He almost smiled. "Good deal." "It looks well used." It was. Somebody wrote in all the margins. He turned a few pages and showed her, penciled notes, small and slanted, crowding the white space beside the stanzas. "I like trying to figure out what they were thinking." Margaret looked at the handwriting. Her hand tightened around the edge of the plate. She knew that handwriting. She had read it on birthday cards and grocery lists and the backs of photographs for 30 years. "Did you ever find out who owned it before?" Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. Marcus shook his head. "No name. Just initials, inside the front cover." He flipped to the first page and tilted it toward her. "R.C. Whoever that was. They really loved this book." The plate was steady in her hands. Everything else was not. That evening, Margaret went to Robert's bedroom and opened the top drawer of his nightstand. The velvet box was there, same as always. Small, navy blue, the hinge worn soft from years of opening. She lifted the lid. The ring's impression was still pressed into the velvet, a perfect circle of compressed fabric where gold had rested for decades. The ring was gone. She stood very still. She checked the drawer again. She checked the shelf above. She got down and looked under the nightstand, feeling along the baseboard with her fingers, collecting dust. Nothing. She sat on the edge of Robert's bed, her side, the left side, the side she still slept on out of habit, and looked at the empty box for a long time. The next Thursday, she watched Marcus more carefully. He was working near the back fence, clearing out a tangle of jasmine that had grown over the iron posts. He moved with that same quiet efficiency she'd noticed from the first day, methodical and unhurried, humming something low under his breath while he worked. She opened the back door. The melody reached her before she could make out the words. Old, minor key, something that moved like water over stones. Her hand found the doorframe. She knew that song. It was a gula melody. She hadn't heard it in years, not since Robert used to hum it while he read on Sunday mornings, a sound so woven into her memory of him that hearing it now, from this boy, in this garden, made her chest seize like something had reached inside and grabbed. She went back to the kitchen. She poured coffee she didn't drink. Later, while Curtis was loading tools into his truck, Margaret came outside with the empty sandwich plate. "Curtis?" She kept her voice easy. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Of course." "Marcus." She paused. "He mentioned his mother passed when he was young." Curtis set down the bag he was holding. Something in his posture shifted. Not defensiveness, but weight, the kind a person carries a long time. "She did. He was 3. He looked at the ground briefly, then back at her. "Della was a good woman. She had a life before me I didn't know all of. There are things she never got to explain." "What kind of things?" He was quiet for a moment. A mockingbird called from the oak tree. The jasmine Marcus had cleared lay in a pile by the fence, still faintly sweet in the warm air. "She left a letter," Curtis said finally. "Sealed. For Marcus. To be opened when he turns 18. He picked up the bag again. 2 more years. "Do you know what's in it?" He met her eyes. "No. And I've made my peace with that." Margaret nodded slowly. She thanked him. She went inside. She stood at the kitchen window and watched Curtis's truck pull away down the long gravel drive, Marcus visible through the passenger window, his profile turned toward the passing trees. She thought about the empty velvet box upstairs. She thought about the melody still humming in her ears. She went to find a box of Robert's old photographs. The box of photographs was in the hall closet, behind Robert's winter coats. Margaret carried it to the kitchen table and opened it under the overhead light. The smell rose immediately. Old paper, faint cedar, something faintly sweet she couldn't name. She hadn't opened this box since the week after the funeral, when she'd been looking for something suitable for the memorial program and had ended up sitting on the kitchen floor for 2 hours. She went through the photographs slowly. Robert at 40. Robert at their wedding. 51. Silver at the temples, laughing at something off camera. Robert in the garden, the roses behind him full and abundant, a coffee cup in his hand. Then she found the one from the study. She had taken it upstairs after the hook moment, tucked it into the box without thinking. Now she laid it flat on the table and looked at it under the light. 2 young men, somewhere outdoor. The quality of the light suggested late summer. Robert was 23, maybe 24, in a collared shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. The other man was taller, laughing hard at something, one hand on Robert's shoulder. On the back, in Robert's careful slanted handwriting, "James and me. The summer everything changed. 1987. James." She turned the photograph over again, looked at the second man's face, his jaw, the line of his shoulders. Her stomach went quiet and cold. On the next Saturday, she was at the back door when Marcus arrived. He had his sketchbook under his arm, the worn brown cover soft at the corners. She kept her voice light. He looked briefly at his father, then back at her. He handed it over. She opened to the first page. Careful pencil drawings of buildings, doorways, roof lines, the geometry of windows and load-bearing walls. Each drawing had a small notation in the lower right corner. She turned pages slowly. There it was, on nearly every one. RC __, quote, _49 __. She asked. She looked up at him. He shrugged, but not carelessly. It was the shrug of someone who has wondered the same thing. Quote, 50, quote, 51, quote, 52. He paused. Quote, 53. Everything stopped. The particular angle of the roofline. It was the estate. Drawn from memory, from the outside, the way someone draws a place they've been circling without knowing why. She closed the sketchbook carefully. She handed it back. "You're very talented," she said. He took it, nodded once, went back to work. Margaret stood at the door and watched him cross the lawn, sketchbook tucked back under his arm, work boots leaving faint prints in the damp grass. Have you ever felt that someone came into your life at exactly the moment they were meant to? Tell us in the comments. She went upstairs to Robert's bedroom. She opened the nightstand drawer. She stared at the empty velvet box for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called no one, just held it, stood there in the quiet room that still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco and the life she thought she had fully known. 3 days passed. Margaret didn't sleep well in any of them. She moved through the house at odd hours. 2 in the morning, 4:30, the sky outside still black and starless. She made tea she didn't finish. She stood in the hallway outside Robert's study with her hand on the door handle and then walked away. She did this twice. On the third night, she went back to the photograph box. She found the picture again. James and Robert, summer of 1987. She set it on the kitchen table beside her ledger and her cold cup of tea and looked at it under the overhead light until the shapes of their faces were as familiar as a map. The jaw, the shoulders, the way the taller man tilted his head, caught mid-laugh, eyes slightly narrowed. She had seen that expression 3 times a week for the past month. On Tuesday morning, she was waiting on the back porch when Curtis arrived. "I need to ask you something," she said, directly. Curtis set down his bag. He looked at her with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who had learned to listen carefully before speaking. "All right. Della's family name." She kept her eyes on his. "Was it always Webb?" A pause, the kind that has weight. "No," he said. "Webb was mine. She took it when we married." He looked at the garden for a moment. Her name before was Della James. The porch railing was warm under Margaret's hand. She held it anyway. __, quote, _63, __, she repeated. __, quote, _64, __. Curtis picked up his bag again, slowly. __, quote, _65, __. Margaret nodded. She thanked him. She went inside. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, the way she used to do in summer when the heat got to her. The water ran and ran. Della James, Robert's photograph. James and me, the summer everything changed. Not a friend named James, a family named James. She turned off the tap, dried her hands on the dish towel, walked to the hallway. She stopped at the study door, put her hand on the handle. This time, she didn't walk away. The room was dark and close, the curtains drawn the way she'd left them 14 months ago. The smell hit her immediately. Pipe tobacco and old paper and cedar and something else beneath it all, something she could only call Robert. She stood in the doorway and breathed it in. She crossed to the desk, sat in his chair. The leather was cool and stiff from disuse. She opened the bottom left drawer. Inside, a rubber-banded stack of utility receipts, a spare set of house keys, a folded South Carolina road map from 1994, and beneath all of it, face down, a single envelope. No name on the front. No address. Just Robert's handwriting in the upper corner. Small, deliberate, the pen pressed hard enough to leave a faint ridge in the paper. She turned it over. Unsealed. She set it on the desk in front of her and looked at it for a long moment. Outside, a car passed slowly on the road beyond the oaks. Then, silence. She unfolded the letter. The letter was 2 pages, written in Robert's hand on plain white paper. The ink slightly faded at the edges where the pages had been folded for a long time. There was no date, no salutation. It began the way a man begins something he has started and abandoned many times, mid-thought, as though picking up a conversation with himself. Her name was Della James. I was 24 and certain I understood what mattered in the world, which is to say, I understood nothing. We were together for one summer, the summer I was finishing my thesis, the summer I thought I might stay in that city and never come back to Charleston at all. Margaret read slowly. Her hands were flat on the desk on either side of the paper, not touching it, as though it might shift if she held it wrong. When I left, I believed it was mutual. I believed we had both understood what it was. Something real, but something with an ending already built in. I was wrong to believe that. I know that now. I think I knew it then and chose the easier interpretation. She turned the page. Years later, I tried to find her. I hired someone. What I learned was that she had moved, married, and had a child, a boy. The man who found her said she seemed well, settled. I told myself that was enough. I told myself that looking further would only cause harm. Margaret's breath came out slowly through her nose. I don't know if the boy is mine. I never asked. I was afraid of what asking would mean, for her, for him, for the life I had built by then. That fear was not nobility. It was cowardice dressed in consideration. She set the second page down. She sat in Robert's chair in Robert's study in the dark and did not move for a very long time. He had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to write this. Enough to fold it and put it in a drawer and carry it for however many years and never say a word. She wasn't angry. That surprised her. She reached inside herself for it and found instead something quieter and sadder. Grief for a man who had been too afraid to do the right thing, and grief for a boy who had grown up not knowing, and grief for herself, sitting in the dark with a letter that had been waiting in a drawer like a held breath. She folded the pages carefully, put them back in the envelope. Then she stood, walked to the window, drew back the curtain, the first time in 14 months, and looked out at the back lawn in the early evening light. The garden was almost restored now. The roses were trimmed and standing. The stone path was level and clean. Marcus had done that. Marcus, who drew buildings with a light always on in one window. Marcus, who hummed a melody Robert had learned from his grandmother. Marcus, who wore a ring that had lived in a velvet box in this house for 30 years. She let the curtain fall. She knew what she had to do in the morning. She just had to find the courage to do it before she talked herself out of it again. Margaret woke before 5 the next morning and lay in the gray dark listening to the house. It was the kind of quiet that has texture, the tick of the hallway clock, the distant sound of a truck on the road beyond the oaks, the house itself settling around her the way old houses do. She had slept in this room for 22 years. She knew every sound it made. She got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window with the mug warm between both palms, and watched the back lawn come slowly into the early light. She thought about Robert, not the Robert of the letter, not the young man who had been afraid and chosen silence, the Robert she had known, the one who left a cup of tea outside her classroom door the morning of her mother's funeral, the one who learned to grow roses because she had mentioned once, years before, that they were her favorite, the one who had carried something alone for a very long time and had written it down because the truth deserved to exist somewhere, even if only in a drawer. She didn't hate him for it. She had checked carefully in the dark. The feeling wasn't there. What was there was harder to name, a kind of sorrow with an opening in it. At 7:15 she picked up her phone. She set it down. She picked it up again and called Curtis. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Calloway. Curtis. She kept her voice steady. I need to ask you and Marcus to come inside today, when you arrive, before you start work. A pause. Not long. All right. I have something to show you. She looked at the envelope on the kitchen table, where she'd placed it the night before, beside the photograph. Quote 71. Another pause. Longer this time. Quote 72. His voice was careful, not alarmed, careful. The way a man speaks when he has been waiting for something without knowing its shape. Quote 73, she said. Quote 74, quote 75. She set the phone down. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, very still. Then she began to move, quietly, deliberately. She made a fresh pot of coffee. She set 3 cups on the table, the good ceramic ones she kept in the back of the cabinet. She put the envelope and the photograph side by side, centered, like evidence laid out by someone who had finally decided to stop being afraid of what it proved. She looked at the table, at the 3 cups, at the morning light coming through the window above the sink, falling in a long, pale rectangle across the floor. She thought about Marcus's sketchbook, every building with a light in one window. She thought about a boy who had been carrying pieces of a story he didn't know he was part of, wearing a ring on a cord, humming a melody that had traveled from one life into another without anyone meaning it to. The clock in the hallway ticked. 7:45 came the way inevitable things do, quietly and all at once. She heard the back gate open. She didn't move from where she stood. She just waited, both hands flat on the table, and listened to the sound of footsteps crossing the garden toward her door. They came through the back door the way they always did. Curtis first, Marcus a step behind, work boots leaving faint prints on the kitchen tile. Margaret was standing at the table. The envelope and the photograph were in front of her, 3 cups of coffee still steaming. "Sit down," she said. "Please." Curtis looked at the table. He looked at her face. He pulled out a chair and sat. Marcus stood for a moment, reading the room the way he read everything, quietly, carefully, then sat beside his father. Margaret sat across from them. She put her hands flat on the table. "I found something," she said, "in my husband's study. I need you both to read it." She slid the envelope toward them. "Curtis, I think you should read it first." Curtis picked it up. He unfolded the pages slowly. The kitchen was very quiet. The small radio on the counter was off for the first time in weeks. Morning light came through the window above the sink in a long, clean line. Curtis read. His face didn't change much, a slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness in his jaw. When he finished, he set the pages down and looked at his son. His voice came out low. Marcus picked up the letter. His eyes moved across the first lines and then slowed. His hand, resting on the table, went very still. He read the whole thing without looking up. When he reached the end, he folded it, carefully, precisely, along the original creases, and set it down. He looked at the ring on the cord around his neck. He looked at Margaret. Quote, 85, quote, he asked, quote, 86, quote, she held his gaze, quote, 87, quote, the clock in the hallway ticked, once, twice, quote, 88, quote, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. He was working through it out loud, the way someone does when they need to hear the shape of a thing before they can hold it. No, Margaret said. He wasn't sure, and he was afraid. Of what? She considered that honestly. Of being wrong, of causing harm, of what it would mean to know and have to act on it. She paused. He wasn't a coward in most things, but in this one thing he was, and I think he knew it. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Curtis put his hand over his son's on the table. Neither of them spoke. Then Marcus looked up at the photograph Margaret had placed beside the envelope. Robert and the man she now understood was Della's father, laughing in the summer light of 1987. He looks like someone I'd have liked, Marcus said quietly. Margaret's throat tightened. She pressed her lips together and waited until she could speak evenly. Quote, 95, quote, she said. Quote, 96, quote. Curtis exhaled slowly. He looked at Margaret across the table, across the coffee cups and the letter, and the 30 years of silence between them all. Underscore, underscore, quote underscore, 97, underscore, underscore. He asked. Margaret looked at Marcus, at the ring, at his hands, still and patient on the table. Quote, 98, quote, she said, quote, 99, quote. 6 months later, the study door stayed open. It had taken Margaret 3 weeks after that morning at the kitchen table to stop closing it out of habit. Now afternoon light fell freely across Robert's desk, across the shelf of architecture books, across the framed pencil drawing mounted where the old university photograph used to be. A building with clean lines and a wide porch, light on in one window, signed in the lower right corner, M.W. Marcus Webb, 17 years old. First-year architecture program, deferred entry confirmed for the following autumn at the College of Charleston. Full scholarship, partly funded by the Calloway estate, arranged quietly through Robert's attorney in a series of meetings that Margaret had attended alone, with the letter in her bag and her hands steady in her lap. The attorney had asked carefully what she wanted to accomplish. Quote, _100, she'd said. Not transaction. There's a difference. He had nodded and written it down. Curtis still came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The garden was fully restored now, the roses full and upright, the stone path level, a new bed of lavender along the south fence that had been Marcus's suggestion and Margaret's agreement. Curtis had stopped calling her Mrs. Calloway sometime in October. She had stopped correcting him. On a Sunday in late November, Margaret made a full dinner. Roast chicken, butter beans, cornbread, sweet tea in the tall glasses she kept on the high shelf. She used the good dishes, cream with a thin blue border, the ones that had been packed away since Robert's last birthday. She set the table for 3. The kitchen smelled like it used to. Warm fat and herbs, and something baking. The small radio on the counter played gospel low and steady, the way it always did on Sunday mornings. Curtis arrived first. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table. Quote, 102, quote, he said. Quote, 103, quote, Margaret said. She handed him a dish towel. Quote, 104, Marcus came in behind him, still in his good jacket from church, the ring on its cord visible at his collar. He stopped when he saw the table. He looked at the framed sketch on the wall, his own drawing, in this room, on this wall, and something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide. Sit down, Margaret said. Both of you, it's getting cold. They sat. The radio played. Margaret moved between the stove and the counter with the ease of someone who had finally stopped being alone, setting down dishes, pouring tea, settling into the rhythm of feeding people she cared about. Marcus looked around the kitchen slowly, at the framed sketch, at the place set for him, at Margaret. This is what I've been drawing, he said quietly. She turned. What do you mean? Every building I sketch, he said. I always put a light on in one window. I never knew why. He looked at the table, at the good dishes, at the steam rising from the food. I think I was looking for this. Margaret set down the dish towel. She didn't say anything. She pulled out the chair beside her and waited for him to sit down. Real family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that leaves a light on and waits. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. We tell stories about the unexpected places love finds us. Tell us in the